Hello, friends, and welcome to the March 15th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. And we certainly missed you all last week while the Texas Impact staff were hanging out with Texans across the state as part of Texas Interfaith Advocacy Days. I would certainly encourage you to go check out content from that event on Texas Impact's YouTube channel. And while you're there, go ahead and make sure to smash the subscribe button so you can find future content. And I'm really excited about today's episode. This is the first episode where Josh will be able to walk us through a loaded action alert. You can find that at texasimpact.org. And spoiler alert, this week, we're going to be talking a lot about voting rights. Before we get to Josh, we will welcome Eva DeLuna Castro with Every Texan to talk about the state budget. But first, I am really excited to welcome to the program friend of Texas Impact, friend of mine, Reverend Jessica Cain from Living Word Lutheran Church in Buda, who I first met at a Lutheran legislative event several years ago. She is an amazing pastor and advocate. So, Pastor Jessica Cain, thank you for joining us, and I'll now turn it over to you for this week's Weekly Word.
Thank you for inviting me. So throughout the seasons of Lent and Easter, my congregation is reading the entire Bible in 90 days. If it sounds like a lofty task, it's because it is, but we have about 15 to 20 people reading along, or at least doing their best to keep up every week. And we gather on Sunday mornings via Zoom to talk about what we read in the last week. Well, right now we're currently deep in the throes of the Hebrew Bible, reading through a series of stories of war. The leaders of Israel, first the judges and then the kings, spend decades trying to consolidate their power, and the accounts are brutal and bloody. We've spent a lot of time talking about how challenging it is to read these texts, especially as they presume an angry, vengeful, war-obsessed God. Yet every week, our conversations also turn to the reality of humankind, that we are sinful creatures, focusing inward, taking care of ourselves, and often ignoring the needs of those around us. Like some theologians and religious leaders, we could say that this is who God created us to be, that in fact, the maker of all things made us to be brutal and destructive and relentlessly individualistic. The truth is, however, that God created us in God's own image. The Almighty One who calls creation very good crafted us as stewards of everything, from the soil and seeds, to the water and sky, to animals and all of our siblings the world over. To be good stewards is to take care of what God has entrusted to us, to treat it as our own while knowing that it is not. The same God knew that one person would be lonely without a partner. We are made for community. To live in the image of God is to see the face of God in each person we encounter, to know that we are intricately connected, that when one of us is in pain, all of creation groans. So for this reason, we are called to engage in the political sphere, to give up some of our own time and comfort on behalf of others. We work with those who have power to bring power to those who do not. Encourage our elected leaders to see that we are all one community, one connected body. We demand good stewardship of resources of all kinds, from those of creation to money to privilege and power. We are made in the image of a God who does not lead us to war and destruction, but to stewardship and creation. And so we work to create a community that reflects that image.
Jessica, thank you so much for that reflection and for the work you're doing each and every day. You're certainly an amazing partner, and we wish you well the rest of today and your week. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, I am now excited to welcome to the conversation a Weekly Witness veteran, another friend of the program, Eva DeLuna Castro, who serves Every Texan as the program director of the Invest in Texas team. Eva, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me to be here.
All right. So coming into the legislative session, many were preparing for a big budget fight. I think we'd both say that Texas never adequately funds state services, but are you expecting the budget conversations to be as dire as originally thought? And what areas are most concerning to you?
I would say that what we were expecting in January was a little more complicated than just a dire session, because when the dire session happens, I think was always the question. For the 2021 session, the legislature has billions in federal help. So really, it is the federal government that is making some tough choices about how we support schools and healthcare to 2023. So asking everybody to think ahead to 2023, I think, is the theme for what I'm going to say today. Extra money for Medicaid for the millions of Texans, mostly children, that get healthcare through Medicaid, has pretty much eliminated the supplemental bill that we would have needed to keep Medicaid going. About $2.5 billion in general revenue was not yet in the state budget. We've gotten so much extra federal help that we may not need that at all at this point. And then the other thing that happened is state revenue is dramatically decreased because of what's happened to the economy, but local property taxes are also still doing very well. That's because they were pretty much calculated before the pandemic came along. So January of 2020 was before everything cratered. So the fact that local property taxes have also not plummeted the way state revenue has, all of that has helped make this be a much better session than it would have been. But looking forward to 2023, we're just kind of wishing that the legislature would use as much of the extra education dollars that are available to actually help schools recover from the pandemic, to the extent that they use federal dollars instead of state money. That sets the stage again for some really tough choices. Those of you who were around in 2011, after 2009 Recovery Act money helped the state budget, will, if you start thinking about questions like how is this going to be different from that, or how might it be similar, I can respond directly to things that y'all are wondering about. But right now it is because of federal aid, because the federal government can increase the debt and the deficit. The states can't do that. They have to have help from the federal government, local governments as well, cities, counties, community colleges, everybody that is hurting right now from not having revenue. The federal help is enormous, and any of you involved in advocacy up to now and doing that, thank you very much, because that was very important.
I want to come back to the federal funding in just a second, but did the power crisis in February change the calculus at all in terms of state budget?
I think the Senate today is already getting to work on some of that. I think it was change maybe the perception of what government can and should do. I think it was yet another example. The COVID pandemic had plenty of them, of how Texas's public systems, whether it's healthcare systems, public health, vaccinations, everything, we were not ready for the pandemic because of years of underinvesting in our public infrastructure. The winter storm showed just how leaving so much to private providers of electricity, in some cases also water, how that does not meet the needs of our communities. Like, we can't just assume that the private sector will take care of everything. So it's changed the conversation, I think, around what safeguards need to be in place. Might also change the budget if we have some state dollars given to utilities to weatherize or winterize. And we're hearing that obviously summer is just as bad for utility companies and homeowners and people with bills as winter is. But there's I think we may end up seeing something like using the Economic Stabilization Fund to create some kind of help for utilities that need to weatherize. We've seen that in the past with the water fund and flood fund. So kind of a recurring pattern of using the ESF, but to do a one-time thing. We want legislators to understand, and y'all are doing good work on this, that it's a systemic, long-term thing. It's related to environmental justice and climate change. It's not just a one-off storm that we'll never see again in our lifetimes. So,
right. So let's come back a little bit to the federal funding, which you touched on in the opening question. So President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan just last week. We talked about there was a lot of conversation about state and local funding as part of that plan. So what specific implications are there for this budget cycle in Texas, and in what ways does the American Rescue Plan interact with the state budget?
I'd say in almost every way you can think of. First of all, there's the extension of unemployment benefits and SNAP food assistance, and also the payments to individuals. The $1,400 stimulus payments. There's already been previous rounds. Any of that helps, not because it flows through the state budget, not is appropriated to the legislature, but it gets money in the hands of Texans who will immediately turn around and spend it. There's also help for things like preventing evictions. So the more that people can stay in their homes and have money to spend on, especially things that the sales tax gets at, clothes, shoes, things like that, that helps the revenue side of the state budget, because it is so dependent on consumption taxes. So anything done to help revive the economy side. The forecast, though, is still kind of grim. The last two times we've had a severe economic recession or depression, it's taken at least 40 months for Texas to recover. We're hearing now it might take even longer, like 2020. So anything helps revive the economy. Congress may have some more proposals, another extension of unemployment benefits, for example, but it's going to be a long-term recovery to get back to the level of employment that Texas had in March of 2020. The other way that this federal money helps is by helping schools. I mentioned before that some of the money Texas received has been used instead of general revenue for the foundation school program, the formulas. Some is in addition. So it's helping schools be prepared for virtual and in-person and all the other ways that teachers have to teach now. So it's helping them do all the extra things they need to do. It's also helping broadband connectivity. There's some money in there for that. There's money for things that we knew all along were going to be a way to help our schools and colleges deal with what's happening better. It doesn't have money for some things that the state budgets were hoping, like pensions. I think there were some state officials holding out hope that we would get help to improve the TRS and ERS pension systems. That I don't think that's in there, but we're looking through the details still. Cities and counties in Texas automatically get money. They don't have to wait for the legislature to decide how that money goes out. And it's regardless of size. Last year, there was money for cities and counties that had a population of at least 500,000 in the American Rescue Plan that has automatic based on things, population, I think unemployment or poverty. There's like a measure of need in there, but there's formulas that automatically get this money out. And there's groups like the Texas Association of Counties and the Municipal League that I'm sure will be helping their members understand how much. A lot of that is because property tax revenues in the next few years are expected to slow down considerably. A lot of empty businesses can't afford to stay open. Commercial leases and things like that. Property values will be hurt. So any local government that depends on property taxes won't have as strong of a tax base as they previously had. So there's a lot of things in there that help the state directly. Education funding primarily. Another big thing that's happened, again, I mentioned Medicaid. We get a better match for Medicaid. It's already a generous match, and we're talking about the regular program, not the even more generous one we get by covering low-income adults. But the longer that continues, the more chance that we won't need supplemental for the next budget, the one that's being written for 2022 and 23.
So you mentioned the supplemental for 22 and 23. Help us understand that supplemental process. So the last number of years we've come in to legislative session needing to address the Medicaid shortfall. Is that the case this session?
This session, there will at least the bill that was filed, House Bill 2. It's in Chairman Bonin has filed the House version of the supplemental, and it's what it sounds like in that it's another appropriations bill. It's not necessarily extra money for anything. It's just another appropriations bill for this budget cycle that we're still not done with. So 2020 and 2021. So what the House version does is it doesn't give extra general revenue to Medicaid. It actually assumes that what the commission has right now is going to be enough to get us through August. It actually takes almost $7 billion in general revenue away from all kinds of things in the budget. And not necessarily a cut. It's just replacing money, at least $6 billion, with other state or other federal dollars. The biggest chunk of money that comes out of the budget is for public schools, more than $5 billion. And there's also money that's being put in there. There's still always shortfalls that legislators create ahead of time, like what we call these IOUs. The legislature meets and doesn't fully pay for services for the next 2 years. They make assumptions about how many people will be getting Medicaid or CHIP or anything. They guess on the caseloads. They have not in the past gotten fully funded the cost of medical care going up in the next 2 years. So medical inflation is never in there. That's usually what creates this shortfall. For prisons, for our prison system, they don't cover correctional managed healthcare inflation either. Sometimes they guess wrong about how much state employee and teacher, retiree teacher, all of those health insurance premiums go up in the next few years. So then they come back and basically fix it in the supplemental. This one is going to reduce the budget by at least $6.5 billion. There's also going to be a little money in there for hurricanes that came along since the last time the legislature met. I think Hurricane Laura, a couple of tropical storms. So there's always things that change because legislators didn't know quite yet what was going to happen by the time August of 2021 rolled around. There isn't a Senate version yet, which is strange because the bill filing deadline was last week, but presumably it'll be pretty similar to what we're seeing in the House proposal.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. Is it safe to assume that Texas leaders are thankful for this federal funding coming in?
I would certainly hope so.
I won't ask you to get into their head, but it certainly does help the budget situation.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it postpones a lot of tough choices. For example, if we hadn't gotten this aid, more than $10 billion really at this point that can be used instead of general revenue, the legislature would have had to be talking about using the entire rainy day fund. And they've made it more and more difficult to use. They would be cutting off money to the highway fund. They would be doing all kinds of complicated things that didn't have to happen because in 2011, the Economic Stabilization Fund was pretty straightforward. State revenue craters because of an economic recession, and there's this money sitting there that you've been forced to save, so use it. But it's just so much more complicated now because of legislative changes that they would have had to vote to use it, and they would have been decreasing highway funding, just one example. So also just all the help that's been provided to the economy. The federal government, extra help for childcare, for housing especially. Those are things we in Texas don't tend to pay for with our own state dollars. So getting extra federal help for childcare centers, that's just one example. That is a huge thing to do to get the economy back on track.
So we encourage our members and those who are listening to call their representatives each week. What would your messaging be around the budget? What do you hope folks will be calling their representatives to talk about?
I'll bring up one other thing because it might end up flying through the Senate and the House, and it's a pretty dangerous thing, just kind of as problematic, or maybe more so than how the legislative changes to the Economic Stabilization Fund. I'll identify myself again for those who might just be joining us. I'm Eva DeLuna Castro, director of the Invest in Texas program at Every Texan, formerly Center for Public Policy Priorities, but in real life, I would tell people I'm a state budget analyst, and I've been doing this since 1991. So the long term is kind of what I look at. And over the long term, the Texas state budget has not grown. We are 48th or 49th per capita. It's a rapidly growing state with rising healthcare costs, for example. So when you divide by population growth and cost growth, we are in the same place we've been for decades, which is putting a lot of the responsibility for public services, for the quality of life that Texans have, on local governments. What has changed in the long run is now the legislature is telling local governments, oh, don't raise property taxes because nobody likes property taxes, so stop doing that. So now it's even more and more up to the state to do anything that improves the level of public services. Yet legislators keep coming up with arbitrary spending caps. So the thing I want to help everybody understand is that about 18 senators have signed on to another state spending cap that would basically just arbitrarily cap anything except for highway spending. And on the House side, it's House Bill 3548 by Chairman Bonin. These are called like spending caps, but there's so many in the Constitution. The specific one that matters is Senate Bill 1336 and the Senate side. That's Senator Hancock, and again, 18 senators signing on. So that's why I'm saying it may just fly through. But the thing to understand is it just arbitrarily says that nothing in the budget should grow faster than population or inflation. And it doesn't allow for things like a pandemic or any other kind of circumstance that makes the budget shrink and then it has to go back to what it used to be. So there's so many things wrong with spending caps, but more limits on what the legislature can do to respond to things like what we're experiencing now. More limits are just, we don't need any more hurdles for legislators to make the right choice. They already have one major one, which is not having enough money. So having all these other arbitrary rules that require them to vote by a supermajority, I just don't understand why these proposals come back every 2 years. But we'll probably see this one as something that gets further down the legislative process than it has before.
So I want to close it out by just saying that every Texan has many great resources when it comes to the state budget. Do you have any shameless plugs you'd want to leave us with today?
I think, I see a lot of questions we're not getting to either. I would say we do have a lot of experts on school finance. For those of you who have questions, I think we're known as Chandra, one of my coworkers, is the person to ask questions about how we pay for schools. And also just all the health and wellness team, what we're doing on Medicaid and getting Texans access to health care. And we work obviously with y'all and with all the other advocates. There's just so many people in Texas identifying themselves today as education voters or healthcare voters, and that's 85% of the budget. So I think understanding what legislators can do and what's preventing them from doing the right thing. I think there's so many good nonprofits, not just us helping people do that, but I think you all are doing an amazing job just getting your members to talk to their state reps and their state senators, because we can do all the great, amazing analysis that there is, but if it doesn't get to somebody in time for them to do the right thing, it's obviously not as effective. So we appreciate all the work you do. I see lots of good questions again. Sorry, we don't have time to answer them all. The Senate bill number for that spending cap, I will close with that. That was Senate Bill 1336. And again, these are just limiting how much the budget can grow is the easiest way. Just arbitrarily saying that in the next 2 years, growth can't be more than 7%, except for highways. So.
Well, Eva, we really do appreciate the time that you spend with us today and the work that you do each and every week on behalf of Texans. And so we'll continue to follow these issues, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next up, we will welcome to the conversation Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Josh Houston. Josh, you doing all right today?
Yeah, I'm okay. How are you?
Doing very well. I ask it that way. Well, I ask you every week, but this week in particular is a special week as the legislature is really starting to kick into high gear, right?
Yeah, special is one word for it. It is certainly a week that is ramping up. Let me kind of start at a high level. I mean, Texas is legislative sessions for 140 days, once every 2 years, and it really consists of three overlapping seasons, if you will. And bill filing season spans the first 60 days. Committee hearing season really dominates March and early April. And then finally, the season for floor action becomes the focus of the last days. And that's really kind of mid-April to May. And these seasons overlap a bit. So this week, really Friday, I suppose, marked a change in season, as we have a literal change in season coming up, but a figurative change in season for the legislature. The bill filing deadline was Friday. So we are now done with bill filing, and committees began to hear bills last week. And so, that was the major news for the week last week. We're all still kind of going through all the bills that got filed. One out of every four bills gets filed in the last 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So about 1,900 bills dropped on us in those 3 days. So I don't have all of them processed just yet, getting close, but not all of them. But despite COVID and Snowvid, the number of bills filed did not in any way decrease. It looks like it slightly increased, but we're still kind of going through some of that analysis.
So bring us up to speed on where we are this week. I know committees are starting, and Texas Impact has our first kind of loaded action alert that we are releasing today on texasimpact.org. Where are we this week?
Yeah, okay. So this is kind of the first week where we have fuller agendas. So committees began to hear a few bills last week. That week where you have the end of bill filing and the beginning of committees is just a scramble for everybody. And this was no different than in any other session. Typically the first week where committees hear real bills is kind of a warm-up week, if you will. They have a smaller agenda generally than usual, and then they will later on. They try to get the easy bills moving. Another thing is sometimes legislation is just not quite ready to go. And it also kind of gives committee clerks and staff an opportunity to either refresh their memories or learn some of the arcane procedures that happen in committee with how you go about moving a bill. But yeah, Scott, you're right. This week we are off to the races with much fuller agendas, and the focus is now entirely on committees.
Yeah, so I just posted, for those who are watching live, our action alert in the chat. For those who are listening to this podcast later or watching via YouTube, you can go to texasimpact.org, click on the Action Center, and towards the top left, you'll see the action alert for the week of March 3rd through 15th. So you ready to walk us through that this week, Josh? I'll note, I think we'll probably keep doing this. There's kind of a big bulleted section at the top with a lot of information on three particular bills, and then a list of a bunch of others that our membership cares about. So you want to walk us through that top section first?
Yeah, and I think this is the organization we'll probably use, is like you said. Top priority is going to be voting rights. Voting is, of course, the right that preserves all other rights. And we've been saying that we expect a full-blown assault on voting rights based on what we're seeing nationally in other state legislatures, based on the general zeitgeist of conversation that's happened since November. It's beginning to unveil itself. So let's start with the good news first. There is a really good bill that we want to have pass. That's ballot tracking. It's one of our top priorities. House Bill 1382 is the very top of your list, and I'm just going to go in order. This is the number one thing that you, the membership of Texas Impact, told us that you wanted, that would increase your confidence in elections. You didn't exactly say it to me that way. The way it was said to us was, so during the primary, during the general election in 2020, The biggest question that I fielded in helping to educate our membership on how to vote and to vote by mail, many of you which voted by mail for the first time, the number one thing I would hear is, how do I know if they got my application? How do I know if that application was accepted or rejected? How do I know that the county has sent a ballot to me? How do I know that they received the ballot back that I mailed them? How do I know if the county accepted or rejected my ballot? How do I know if my vote counted? And it was extremely frustrating. The only thing I could tell you to do was to call them and harass them to see if they could look it up for you, which is not a good system at all. It was extremely frustrating for me to be able to check my package tracking on a pair of underwear that I bought and to see it come from Indiana to Kansas, to Oklahoma to Texas. But the state of Texas can't tell you where your ballot is. Come on, we've got to do better. And so if this bill were to pass, it would create that ballot tracking system, which several counties did on their own without being instructed to. Many counties just hauled off and did it because, I wasn't the only one receiving those questions. Counties must have been inundated with those questions too. So it is doable. In fact, the state already does it for military and overseas voters. They just don't do it for those of you residing here in the state of Texas. This bill would make that happen. And we think it would be the number one thing to increase confidence in elections and to be able to troubleshoot where various parts of the process break down. Which then brings me to the bad bills. So let me back up and finish with that ballot tracking one by saying it is up in committee on Thursday morning. So we want it to pass. We will be there in support of it, and we want this bill to pass. The second bill, which is also up on Thursday in the House Election Committee, is House Bill 1725 by Representative Paul. This bill would prohibit a voter from delivering in person their mail-in ballot. Just straight up prohibited. Many of you probably did it because with all the shenanigans with the U.S. Mail Service, many of you did not trust the mail. And trusting the U.S. Postal Service is not a prerequisite for your right to vote. Having the money to go to FedEx or UPS is not a prerequisite for your right to vote. We have had some form of hand delivery of mail-in ballots since the 1930s. This is not a new thing that we did because it was a pandemic. It was an existing part of the law that's been law for decades and decades in Texas. Additionally, Texas Impact did a study. We had not published a report on it, but we open records requested we wanted the gross number of the number of ballots, mail-in ballots accepted and the number of mail-in ballots rejected for the last 3 election cycles dating back to 2016. And so as part of the study, one of the things we learned is that the number one reason, and not just the number one reason, but many counties stress to us that the overwhelming majority of their rejected ballots are rejected just because they arrive at the county late. The post office got them there late, and that's why they don't count. We know that's true. If this bill passes, let me tell you one additional fact. In July of 2020, the United States Postal Service sent a letter to Texas, to the Secretary of State and the governor, in which it said your legal deadlines for your mail-in ballots do not jive with our delivery schedules. The dates that people are relying on don't work. And so we can't get the mail-in ballot back to the counties in time. You need to get those things congruent, or at least be aware that we can't promise. The USPS has said, make sure you give us at least a week. Otherwise, you need to hand deliver your mail-in ballot. But if we're going to prohibit that hand delivery, then we're going to have all sorts of things go wrong. Often a county will have to send out a corrected ballot because there's something wrong with one little particular precinct or the way they did it. That could become an issue for people. You're going to have voter error, and sometimes voters will mess up and send a second application, forgetting they sent a first application, and that will cause a second ballot to get issued. There are all sorts of issues like that. And additionally, this bill does absolutely nothing to increase the security of elections. Hand delivering your mail-in ballot is not a security problem. In fact, you actually have to have your photo ID to hand deliver it. It's simply a voter convenience that they are taking away. It's an unnecessary bill that we know will disenfranchise more voters, because we know the number one reason for voters being disenfranchised through mail-in balloting is that it arrives late. So we're going to oppose this bill, and we hope you call and urge the committee to oppose this bill as well. The final bill on here is Senate Bill 7 by Senator Hughes. Now, I want to stress it has not been scheduled for a hearing yet. I say yet because I want you to note the low bill number, Senate Bill 7. When you see a low bill number like that, it means that it's got the backing of the Lieutenant Governor. The first 30 to 40, it varies from session to session, but the first, 1 through, in this case, probably about 31 bills in the Senate were reserved because then it's a way of the Lieutenant Governor signaling this is my bill, because Lieutenant Governor can't actually file a bill. It's a senator that has to file a bill. But it signals the backing of the Lieutenant Governor of being a top priority of Lieutenant Governor's office. This is a very large bill. You're going to hear a lot more about Senate Bill 7, we predict, in the days and weeks to come. It is a large bill that covers many areas of voting law. But one provision in particular caught our eye immediately and is worth getting loud about right now. And that has to do with the one of the excuses for voting by mail is disability. So let me refresh your memory on what the law currently is in Texas. Over the summer, the Texas Supreme Court ruled that fear of COVID alone is not enough to make you disabled. However, if you had any condition medical condition that puts you at greater risk, it is up to you, the voter, that gets to ascertain that risk. That is current law in Texas. Now, currently there's no proof of that required. So what the legislature is now trying to do to make it harder to vote by mail is to say, you now need a doctor's note. And the doctor has to sign off and certify that you, the voter, are actually disabled. There are a number of problems with this provision. One, doctors are not lawyers. A doctor cannot, you're asking a doctor to practice law and to ascertain whether or not a particular patient meets the legal definition of disability. I hope the doctors jump on this hard because they're being asked to practice law. Two, your access to a doctor is not a prerequisite for your right to vote. Let's talk about expanding Medicaid. Let's try to get people don't even have access to doctors. So right away, this is functionally a poll tax in a sense that it requires you to have the means to have access to a doctor to get a doctor to say you're disabled in the first place. Three, this is going to create a lot more work for counties to have to process all these certificates. Four, and this is probably the biggest one, your private medical history is none of the state's business. Your private medical history is not a prerequisite. In a sense, you shouldn't have to reveal all of your private medical history to the state in order to have this right to vote. That's just absolutely asinine. And this does nothing to increase security. Again, this is not about election integrity. These are otherwise eligible voters that we're talking about. People who are already registered to vote, who are eligible to vote, who are legally entitled to vote, who are simply choosing the means by which they're going to exercise their franchise. And all we're doing is making it harder for them. Therefore, it is de facto suppressive. So we hope that you call your state senator on this bill right away. The Senate is a mysterious body. How and why it does what it does is sometimes not always clear. And that's because a lot of deals get cut in the back room by the way that the rules work. So we hope that you lean on your senator now and that senators can exert their quiet influence in the way that the Senate does to get this problematic provision removed before it even gets heard in committee.
I'm going to start a tracker for the session, Josh, to see how many times you used the word asinine.
Well, it may have been a little strong. I said it and then kind of thought, well, but seriously, we eliminated the requirement for a doctor's note decades ago, and we've been voting by mail since the 1930s. There's no proven, like, I haven't even heard of any allegations where somehow this led to fraud or in any way hurt the integrity of the election. Because these are people who are otherwise qualified. I will say we actively encouraged people to vote by mail because it meant fewer people in the lines on election day or during early voting. And fewer people in the lines, just statistically speaking, means a reduced risk of transmission of COVID. So this is actually putting lives at risk. If people had an excuse, and many states don't even require excuse. A supermajority, or at least a majority, I think a supermajority, close to it anyway, of U.S. states don't require an excuse to vote by mail. We're one of the 16 that do. For what reason is not even clear. But again, these are otherwise qualified voters who would be able to vote anyway. And we're just trying to make it harder for them to vote.
Yeah, so clearly we're gonna be talking about voting this week, at least in the office, and the big three issues on the action alert all relate to voting. So we'll talk through after we finish going through the action alert how we hope that you'll use it. But there are also some other bills that our membership care about that we'll be watching this week. Can you walk us through the second page of that action alert?
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of blow through these because they're simpler to understand. Right now in Senate and State Affairs, as we speak, Senate Bill 30 is a good bill by Senator West. If any of you have ever lived in East Texas or an older part of the state, you may, I remember my family bought a house in College Station for us when we were in college, and it had this deed restriction called a restrictive covenant. And restrictive covenants, once they're put on a property, just never go away under the common law unless the state legislature by statute says otherwise. One of the racist provisions that still exists from 100 years ago is restrictions on African Americans owning or otherwise being on the premises of the property. They are unconstitutional, they are unenforceable, but they are still on the books. So what this does is it provides a way to take it off the books. It's a good bill. It's got the Lieutenant Governor's support being a Senate Bill 30, so I think it's in pretty good shape, but it is worth calling and saying, yay, go on this bill. Next bill, House Bill 531. Okay, the next two bills involve basically Hurricane Harvey floods, climate resilience in general. House Bill 531, we're trying to get done again. It came up last session. Frankly, the landlords blocked it. We're going to try to do it again. This bill would require landlords to provide notice to tenants if the dwelling that they're going to lease is located in a floodplain. Again, you're in a floodplain, you might want to buy flood insurance, your property could get damaged. Your personal property could get damaged. You might want to get renter's insurance. Number two, House Bill 1059, very similar. It would require a seller of real property to provide notice to a buyer of that property that it's in a floodplain. Now, we did pass a bill on this last session. If a residence is already on it, then you have to provide notice. This bill expands on that work. It says, okay, so there's not a structure on the property yet. It's 15 acres or less. A developer's looking at it, type situation where you might have a house there one day. We need to get this disclosure up front right now that there is a problem that it could lead to flooding. And this is a good bill as well. This is House Bill 1059. Both of these bills are up for a hearing in House Business and Industry. This is on Tuesday. We hope you will call that committee and support those bills. The next bill is a religious bill, actually. So House Bill 1011 by Representative Turner. This bill would provide a process for expediting a death certificate when the person who's passed away is going to be laid to rest in a foreign country for religious reasons. So right away, this is the Jewish community, but also the Muslim community probably has an interest in this bill as well. We support it. It should get done. This bill is up on Wednesday in the House Public Health Committee. We hope you call them and support that bill. And then that brings us to Thursday. We've already talked about the election bills up in committee on Thursday. Over in House State Affairs, you have several energy bills, because we're going to be talking a lot about power this session, both political and electrical power. And these are electric bills. So House Bill 11, support weatherization of electric generation. We all remember that the power plants tripped off because they weren't weatherized. This bill would move forward on that policy. House Bill 12 creates an alert system. It studies the best way to do an alert system so that, one of the things we all experienced was going to bed thinking everything was fine and waking up to the power being out for 3 days straight. The public was not in any way put on notice that we were going to be without power and water for days and even weeks in some cases. We need a better alert system to let people know that this is a real possibility so we can protect ourselves. House Bill 13, supporting an Energy Disaster Reliability Council. So one of the big problems was a lack of communication between the regulatory body of oil and gas, called the Railroad Commission, and the Public Utility Commission. What this bill would do is it would create such a council at the Texas Division on Emergency Management. So the disaster people are in charge of it as the chair, and it would force those two agencies to get together to try to make sure that we don't have that problem happen again in a disaster situation. House Bill 16, on all of these are support. House Bill 16, you probably heard about the big exorbitant bills people had. Years ago, Texas Impact opposed the creation of these products. We lost, and here we are. What these products are is, unlike most people in the state have a fixed rate for electricity. In other words, no matter what happens, this is the rate you're going to pay. In the so-called deregulated market, the investor-owned utility market, individual customers are responsible for buying their own power plans, their own rate plans. Some people bought variable rate plans, essentially, is what they are. And so they are tied to the wholesale price of electricity. We said it was a bad idea because ordinary residential consumers just don't really have, maybe there's a couple, but the overwhelming majority of consumers just don't have the knowledge to be able to know what wholesale pricing is doing in the electric marketplace. And sure enough, a lot of people got five-figure, $10,000 utility bills because their rate was fixed to this wholesale price that just skyrocketed when all the power tripped offline. These products are dangerous to consumers and just should not be allowed. And so this would prohibit that product on the marketplace.
So I want to talk through, this is the first time we've had one of these really long action alerts during the course of the legislative session. I want to talk through kind of what we hope that you will do with it. So you'll see with each one of the bills that's listed, a link to the committee members who are on that committee that'll be hearing the bill, and then the toll-free number for the chair and the vice chair. Our hope is that you'll click on the members for each one of those committees and see if your representative or senator is serving on that committee. If they are, 100%. We hope that you will call your representative or senator and talk through this bill, whether or not you support or oppose, using the language that's in the action alert. If you have questions about that, you can email me at scott@texasimpact.org. If your representative or senator is not on the committee and that bill is important to you, we hope that you'll call both the chair and the vice chair to relay the message to them. For those who are on the rapid response team, we'll be emailing out a list of the committee members with their toll-free numbers, so it's all in one nice place for you to look through. We're encouraging you to use those toll-free numbers that Texas Impact has set up so we can track how many calls each one of the representatives or senators are receiving. So we hope that you'll go ahead and program in your toll-free number for your representatives. Josh, anything to add there?
No.
All right. Anything else you'd like to add before we close out today?
No, just stay tuned. I think we're going to be talking about voting rights a lot.
We will inevitably be talking about voting rights a lot. And friends, I'd encourage y'all to share this action alert with your friends. I know I received several emails from you all last week saying that you forwarded it on to your Sunday school class or social justice ministries or just your friends. Please share it on social media and pass it along to anybody you think might be interested. I'd like to once again say thanks today to Reverend Jessica Cain, who joined us for the Weekly Word. I'd like to thank Eva DeLuna Castro for being our featured speaker today, and Josh for the work you put in reading through a good chunk of 1,900 bills or whatever the number was this weekend and putting his action alert together for us. We'll be hearing more from Josh soon as the week goes on. And friends, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in and for the work that you are planning on doing this legislative session. Remember that Texas Impact has ways for you to get involved. We will be posting these action alerts every Monday afternoon. We'll be sending updates to our rapid response team, so we'd encourage you to sign up for that so you can receive those updates and up-to-date information throughout the course of the week. And finally, we encourage you to consider joining the legislative engagement groups, which will pair you up with other advocates in your district. You can sign up for the rapid response team and the legislative engagement groups by going to texasimpact.org, clicking on the Action Center, and registering for those two groups. Again, if you have questions about any of this, you can reach out to me. It's scott@texasimpact.org. And finally, we hope that you remember that if you appreciate the work of Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, please make sure that you and your congregation are members by going to texasimpact.org/join. Y'all, the legislature is gearing up. There are hearings going on as we speak, so now is the time for you and your congregations to be active and engaged. We hope that you're subscribed to the podcast, leave a rating and review, join the team, invite a friend, and let's get to work. Thanks, friends.